apologies for the delay. We had some technical difficulties to iron out, but we have a very special guest today. We're going to be talking about the impeachment trial that's going on in Washington, D.C. Yes, the latest impeachment trial. You might have already forgotten about the first one back in 2019 and 2020. Well, it's happening again. And yes, the object of scorn by the establishment in Washington, D.C. is again Donald Trump, who's no longer president. And we'll get into this. This is quite a scene. We've also got some video clips as well and some analysis to do with a very special guest who's joining me right now on the live link. And his name is George Szamuely. And he's from the Global Policy Institute. George is joining us from Budapest in Hungary. And George, thank you for joining us at 21 Wire Live.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Patrick. Good to be with you again.
So we'll get cracking on the subject at hand, George. There's another impeachment hearing and a trial in the Senate. It's like nothing anybody's ever seen in history. Certainly, this is breaking new ground for U.S. politics, as if there weren't any sacred cows left to slay. It seems like we're in new territory here. I mean, George, how long has it been since the last impeachment trial? A lot of people, they forgot it even happened. Here we are again. What are your initial thoughts on this? And then we'll get into breaking down what happened yesterday and what we might expect to see going forward. But go ahead.
Well, it's an extraordinary thing because, as you say, it's almost exactly 12 months since the last impeachment trial. And they're going pretty much through the same routine. Namely, the charges are completely nebulous, have no real bearing on what the Constitution actually says, the kind of charges upon which you can act to remove a president. Namely bribery, treason, high crimes, and misdemeanors. So just as a year ago, they really had almost no real case against Trump. This time they're coming up with an even weaker case. And unlike last year, they haven't even bothered to gather evidence, to collect witness testimony. They just simply rushed through this impeachment in the House of Representatives and dumped it into the hands of the Senate. And essentially, no one is expecting anything other than pretty much a partisan vote, a party line vote. Every single Democrat will vote to convict Trump, just like every single Democrat in the House voted to impeach Trump. And, something like maybe 5 to 10% of the Republicans will go along with the Democrats. But the extraordinary thing is that if you think about the history of the United States, so there was one impeachment in the first 200 years of the Republic, which is the case of Andrew Johnson. And now there have been essentially 4 impeachments in the last 50 years. I mean, I'm including Nixon because they went through the impeachment process, but he resigned before it actually went to the House. But that's 4 in the last 50 years. So in other words, impeachment has now become a regular part of the political process. I mean, it wasn't supposed to be that, and for a very good reason. I mean, if you have a democratic republic, then the decision as to who should be in office should be up to the voters. They're the ones who elect leaders, and then they're the ones who can then oust the leaders that they've elected. But now we have a situation where that decision is being taken away from the voters, and it's institutions that can decide as to who's fit for office. Now, what's happening here is that since Trump is already no longer in office, then this is all being directed toward ensuring that he never again runs for office. Now, they, since they know that the votes are really not there, as it seems, like, you can't always tell with the Republicans. They're a very weak, pusillanimous lot. They're not like disciplined the way the Democrats are. They stick to their man through thick and thin. Republicans aren't like that. But we have to think that it doesn't look like the votes are there to convict. So what it's really about is a humiliation of Trump, and above all, a humiliation and an attack on Trump's supporters. It's to label them insurrectionists. They are the enemies of the people. They are, against the rule of law and order. They are the white supremacists. They are the domestic terrorists. So it's really an attack against them in the hope that it would just demoralize them, and that they never support anybody like Trump again. And so that's really now the goal here. And if we'll talk about what happened yesterday, but that was really what it was all about. It was entirely an emotional appeal, and it's in order to beat down Trump's supporters.
And if you listen to the commentary afterwards on all the major networks, that's what they were commenting on. Was it was emotional, it was gripping, talking about Jamie Raskin's presentation there, where he even in, I mean, my sympathy goes out to anybody who experiences a family tragedy, even the loss of Joe Biden's son, Beau Biden, and so forth. But in the case of Jamie Raskin, he was apparently was in Washington, I believe, for a funeral. His children were there. He brought them to the Capitol. They had just buried one of his sons, who died, took his life in suicide.
Yes.
I know that must be absolutely horrific, but I don't think it's out of line to make the observation that I would question why a politician would want to use their deceased family member as part of a political process, in a demagoguery sense. I mean, I can't believe the lengths that people will go to in politics in order to drive their point home in 2021, and so that was that was the kind of great moment, according to all the pundits on MSNBC, NBC, CBS, was this emotional speech. It was moving, they said. It was, and he said, we sent our last text messages. We said goodbye to our loved ones when the rioters came in to the Capitol, like they were all going to die, basically. Like, it was like a HBO film, the day after or the day before the America got nuked or something. I mean, the whole thing was just completely over the top. But this plays really well, George, with Democrats to their base, and so we're just going to get more of it because the networks like it.
Yes.
And by the way, Trump plays to the networks too. At least he used to Fox and other networks. That's changed now. So, but the Democrats have a lot more to play to in terms of media. But what do you think about how this is framed from the punditry side, and does that affect what actually is said on the floor of the Senate?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. This is the most shameless demagoguery imaginable, because yes, it is tragic to lose a son, and no question, everyone has sympathy for a bereaved parent. On the other hand, there is something really, despicable, maybe too strong a word, but something really unpleasant about somebody exploiting a personal tragedy for a partisan political end. I mean, it's just not something that you do. I mean, you suffer a loss, you don't talk about it. That's the way it used to be, according to the norms that once prevailed in the United States. But this is really how the Democrats are playing it. I mean, it's not too dissimilar from what Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has been playing, with her constant refrain that she was close to dying on January the 6th. And then she escalated that to attacking Senator Ted Cruz of wanting to have her murdered. I mean, these are absolutely shameless demagogic attacks. But the media love to continue to regurgitate them. And what's also interesting when we talk about this demagoguery is, for instance, the apparently dead Capitol Hill police officer, I think Brian Sicknick, who the media hyped up. The death was he was beaten to death by a fire extinguisher. And now, I mean, as the story goes on, we're finding out more and more, and we're finding out that really he suffered no blunt force trauma, and even the timeline that has been presented as to his death has great holes in it. We really don't know, how he died. But the media have nonetheless used it. And in fact, the impeachment memorandum written by the Democrats brought up the case of the death of Sicknick. So somehow these rioters, the Trump insurrectionists, beat a police officer to death with a fire extinguisher. And now, we're sort of finding out, well, where's the autopsy report? Where's the medical examiner's report? And we've had 200 people who have been arrested because of their involvement on the events of January 6th, and yet the investigation as to the people who actually beat this police officer to death seems to be going nowhere. No one has been arrested on this. We've seen no naming of suspects, no pictures of suspects. We haven't seen any kind of close camera footage of the beating of this police officer. So we don't know. We really don't know what happened to him. But nonetheless, this has been exploited because this is, well, look at this Trump mob. They beat a police officer to death. Well, where's the evidence for this? And in fact, again, when they talk about the 5 people who died during the riot, there was always this 5 people. Well, the only person that we know definitely died, as a result of what happened on January the 6th, was this young woman who was shot by, we don't know by whom, whether this was a Capitol Hill police officer, whether he was Secret Service. All we see, in what we've seen on the footage, is that somebody shooting to kill at close range. But the person hasn't been named, and we don't know, what his role was. But that's one person we know who was killed as a result of the riot. The other 3, again, it's always left a little mysterious, how they died. There've been stories that they were trampled to death, they had a heart attack, whatever. And then, of course, we have the case of Sicknick, who, they had him lying in state, but we simply don't know enough about what happened. The point is that to exploit a death in this way is, again, shameless demagoguery, and particularly as the family of Sicknick have asked that his death not be exploited politically. So again, you see how the Democrats play this, and how the media are always happy to run with the story, even as Trump is supposed to be this terrible demagogue. But he doesn't carry a torch compared to what the others are doing.
It's almost like there's not enough there materially, George, to make a kind of legal case. So you have to throw in all of the various tertiary deaths, and they keep repeating 5 people lost their life. 5 people lost their life. This gets repeated every time. But when you break that down, it's one of the people was a protester who was shot and killed unarmed, shot in the head or in the neck by one of Mike Pence's Secret Service detail. Was she posing a direct threat to Mike Pence or anybody in Congress in the building at the time? Nobody's talking about that. There's no call for any inquest or inquiry into that. So everything is partisan to an extreme degree. So first of all, like, just looking here, you'll see some footage here, George, from 2019 of the first impeachment that happened, and so that turned into kind of a, an opportunity to an exhibitionist partisan opportunity to kind of bash Donald Trump, and they were very aggressive. All the witnesses. This is Jonathan Turnley. He was actually defending Trump here, or defending the constitutional process here. But you'll see other faces here, George, like Fiona Hill, and some of these other professors and legal experts that came in, and it was really kind of an indictment on Trump's personality, I think. And there wasn't much there in terms of actual evidence, but they had endless amount of witnesses have come in, George. So do you think this scene that we saw in 2019, is this a repeat of what we're going to see in the next few days? Are they going to bring in lots of quote witnesses, academics, people to say what a horrible, horrible thing that happened on January 16th? Are they going to bring in the children of congressmen? What are you expecting to see?
Well, I actually don't think they're going to have any. I mean, this was still at the time of the House of Representatives impeachment process when they had these witnesses. There were no witnesses at the trial. There were only the counsel on both sides who were presenting their case. So this part of the process has already been and done. They had no witnesses at all. They just rushed through an impeachment resolution in which, they just, basically we had all the congressmen making political speeches, not in any way legal findings of any sort. So now it's in the well of the Senate. It doesn't look like anybody is in the mood to call witnesses, because, of course, if Schumer, the Senate Majority Leader, if he were to demand witnesses, then of course the defense would demand witnesses as well, and that's where it might get a little bit tricky, because then they were going to start bringing up issues like, well, what were all these politicians saying last summer other than an encouragement to violence? And I think that would almost certainly be said, well, you're sitting here judging Trump, but look at all the things that you were saying. And they'd have Maxine Waters, saying, we got to get in their face, got to, wherever they are, in the restaurants, in the supermarkets, we got to accost them. I mean, that's an explicit call for violence as you can get. And then there'll be others about Kamala Harris, who's egging this on. So I think that's going to come up. And then, again, if they want to address the issue of, well, was Trump slow in calling in the National Guard? Well, that's going to be very tricky, because they might then turn around and say, well, it was up to Nancy Pelosi. Somebody had asked Nancy Pelosi to call in the National Guard, yet she didn't. And then, of course, the big question will be, how much did the FBI know ahead of time that there was going to be trouble on January the 6th? I mean, we know all of this, that there was already anticipation of trouble, in which case, why was the police presence so negligible? I mean, in fact, that is an issue that should be addressed, which is, what, 500,000 people descend on Washington, D.C., and there is no extra police presence? I mean, that is bizarre. So that's kind of thing that will come up. Not to mention all the timeline, which is, here we have the first incursions into the building was taking place while Trump was still speaking. So there will be witnesses called who will say, yeah, this was the first time that anybody actually breached the building, and Trump was only halfway through his speech at that time. I mentioned to Nancy Pelosi that there would be a problem and that we should call in the National Guard, and she rejected that proposal. So I don't think the Democrats want to go down this path. So I think that there's just going to be the presentation of the prosecution case, the defense presents its case, and then there'll be just the up or down vote. But as I said, I mean, the Republicans are a very cowardly lot, and I can quite imagine that a few of them will go over to the Democrats. We saw yesterday one Republican, again, a sort of a right-wing Republican, I assume. I mean, he's a senator from Louisiana, Cassidy, who was suddenly persuaded by the Democrats' case. He had voted the other way when Rand Paul had wanted his vote on the motion. This is an impeachment is unconstitutional. So now he seems to have switched his vote. So again, you can always count on some Republicans would switch their vote. I just don't think at this stage that there are enough Republicans who would have to come over, because you'd have to have 17 of them to go over. At the moment, look, they've got 6 who've gone over. So they need to find another 11 Republicans to go over to the Democrats. I mean, I can see them finding another 2 or 3. I can't see them finding 11. But stranger things have happened, so I can't rule it out altogether.
Yeah, and just looking at the events on January 6th, George, do you think, I mean, this is a hypothetical question, but it's actually, I don't like hypotheticals, but this might be an interesting hypothetical, actually. Do you think even if Donald Trump did not give that speech at the Ellipse on January 16th, the so-called incitement speech that the Democrats are accusing him of, do you think then if he didn't give that speech at that time, on that day, that and if this demonstration went ahead in the way that it did at Capitol Hill, would they be impeaching him anyway? That's my question to you. Is
very good question. I would say yes, they would be, because they will say, but that Trump had egged this crowd on by continually refusing to accept the election result. So by continually challenging this election, he was basically whipping up, and that's part of the Democrats' memorandum, that Trump has sort of been whipping up this fervor among his supporters because he has refused to accept something that is clearly scientifically incontrovertible, that Biden won the election. So yeah, I think they would be. The Democrats really are very nervous. I mean, they're very nervous, obviously, that Trump could come back. And even if he doesn't himself run in 2024, then some Trumpian-like figure, maybe his son, Donald Trump Jr., would run in 2024. And they do feel very vulnerable in all sorts of ways that we can get into. I mean, they have a very weak, ineffectual president. They're pushing a very unpopular agenda, a very kind of woke, doctrinaire, politically correct agenda. It doesn't enjoy it. To a kind of another populist challenge in 2024, much as the sort of Obama and Clinton were in 2016. And I think that they want to prevent this. And how do you prevent it? Well, I think you beat down the populist movement. I mean, in other words, to say that anytime anyone comes along with a populist message, you're going to suffer the consequences. We will impeach you, and then we'll impeach you again, and we'll impeach you again. So I think that it's something that is absolutely essential to the Democrats and how they intend to hold on to power. I mean, in other words, they just say, you challenge us, you beat us in an election, and we're just going to make life impossible for you. We can just keep having impeachment every other day. And I think that's the message that they want to get out.
Okay, we're going to take a very brief live break here, and we'll be back in just a minute with our guest George Szamuely here at 21 Wire Live. So just stay right there, and we'll see you in just a minute. Welcome back to 21 Wire Live. Thank you for rejoining us here. I'm with my guest, George Szamuely from the Global Policy Institute. And George, before the break, we're talking about breaking down what we might expect in the impeachment trial that's coming on in the Senate right now. And in a lot of this is also very much precedent. And when we look at the events, I mean, you can see here congressmen in their gas masks. It was all very dramatic, and the word insurrection was used. And it seems to me, George, like the entire proceedings are hanging on that word. And so my big concern, and of course the concern of everybody, should be this the hyperbolic terms like sedition, like insurrection. Does this, what we're seeing here, qualify as insurrection, or is this a riot? Is this a protest gone awry with a few people clashing with police? Police then were throwing, by the way, flash grenades and tear gas, and that's when things started getting, according to this Vice reporter here, we're looking at some footage from Vice News and also from NBC and CBS, and that's when things started getting aggressive and the push and pull started. So if you're going to call this insurrection and quote sedition, I mean, they weren't going to reverse the results of the election.
Right.
In fact, what was going on there was senators and congressmen were pushing for a 10-day investigation to audit the votes in these key swing states. So,
Exactly.
I mean, if this is allowed to go ahead, and if it's successful, it's already successful in media terms. The use of this term has now been adopted almost universally. Even Republicans are using this term. What does that say about speech as well? Because if you allow hyperbole to overtake reality, as it were, then any speech at a political rally could be insurrectionist going forward. What are your thoughts on how this whole side of things is shaping up?
Well, this is absolutely right, because, of course, if it were an insurrection, then you would see people with guns. You would see some attempt at a seizure of power. And we saw none of that. And in fact, the net effect of these events was essentially the cancellation of what Trump was trying to achieve. I mean, what Trump wanted to achieve, as he said, was this delay so that it could be sent back. I mean, remember, what had happened was that a number of state legislatures had protested what the governors of their state had done. The governors of their states had certified the election, and the state legislature was saying, no, that was incorrectly done. And so what the objective was that it would be sent back to the states, so they would actually, be 10 days, they would actually sort this out as to who's right, the governor or the state legislature, as to the election outcomes in those states. But the net effect of what happened was that this entire process was canceled. And so it would be very strange for Trump to interrupt a process that was actually the goal of which was to get this sent back to the states. I mean, it made no sense for him to try to interrupt this, which is what happened. And so that whole issue of let's send it back to those states that were challenging the certification, that just disappeared as a result of this. So again, it would seem very strange for there to be a kind of an attempt to disrupt a very process that was working toward Trump's advantage. And so that's why it makes no sense. And then if you look at the footage itself, as you say, it's much closer to say it was a protest that went awry. Now, it may be because the police had used excessive force or used it foolishly or whatever, but it was a protest. And then in other cases, we've also seen footage of the police letting people in. So there were many people who were entering the building, but were very confused about what was going on. Were they supposed to be in the building? Weren't they supposed to be in the building? And then they kind of, wandered around the building taking selfies. if we then look at it and say, what was damaged? I mean, was anything damaged in the building? No. All those beautiful paintings and all those sculptures, no one did any damage to anything like that. At most, it looks like a few windows were broken. The exact circumstances of why that happened, why those windows were broken, no one's really investigated this, and no one seems to want to conduct a thorough investigation of those events. And again, which makes the impeachment so cynical and ridiculous, is that you'd have thought, well, the impeachment should come after there has been an investigation. So you hire whatever agencies, or you could have a panel of distinguished people look into the events of January the 6th, and then they can report back and say, determine what role, if any, Trump himself played on it. Then you can go ahead and impeach. And the time factor isn't really important here, because since the Democrats are in any case going ahead with an impeachment after Trump has left office, so it wouldn't really matter that this panel investigating the events of January the 6th would report back in March, because according to the Democrats' theory, you can impeach a president at any time, long after he's left office. So therefore, there shouldn't have been any problem about delaying and say, okay, well, let's find out what actually happened, and then we'll move ahead to impeach. But that's not what they did. I mean, they said, well, let's move right away, because of course they wanted to make their political point right away, and to discredit Trump and his supporters right away, because of course the alternative would be that people would start paying attention to Biden and what the Biden administration is doing, which is issuing a whole bunch of executive orders, again, maybe questionable in its legality, but also very questionable in its popularity. I mean, we talk about the Keystone Pipeline. Obviously, these are working class bread and butter issues there. But then you've got essentially the end of any kind of immigration enforcement. Again, very unpopular things, very divisive things. So but instead of addressing that, we're all still talking about Trump. So it serves kind of a double purpose. It discredits Trumpians, the Trump supporters, and helps deflect attention from the Biden administration.
It almost seems, George, I'm making almost a joke here, but I'm actually dead serious, that without Donald Trump, there is a danger for the major networks like CNN, MSC. Their ratings are going to basically flatline again, like they have been. So is this in a way, this is like one last sort of dash to grab some ratings and remain relevant, and then they have to go back to pretending to be fourth estate during the Biden administration. Almost like they're addicted to Trump. Really, they haven't been able to function without him. It's given them a raison d'etre. It's given them a purpose. It's allowed journalists like Jim Acosta at CNN to grandstand and pretend he's Edward Murrow just because he's standing up and wagging his finger at a White House press conference, but not really saying too much. But let's get to what happened last night, the beginning of this Senate impeachment trial. And we saw, again, we talked about the emotive arguments here. There's Lester Holt there from NBC. I don't really want to get into critiquing him, but they've come up with a straw man argument, George, and it's cascaded through the media. And it's called the January exception. So the January exception is that we can't allow this president to do what he wants, or any president in the final waning moments of their administration. They cannot be allowed to have a, quote, January exception, and then get away with it and leave office without having to pay any price, a political price, I might add, for the actions they've done there. That's one of their central points that they're hanging the rhetoric on. But in a way, it's a kind of a straw man argument. And I don't see how that's defensible. The real argument really should be whether legally the president's words or that he spoke at the speech at the ellipse qualifies as incitement. That would be the evidentiary
Right,
point, wouldn't it?
right, right,
Instead,
right.
we're getting all of this other stuff. But
Yeah,
your
no,
thought?
that's right. You raise a very good point. Unfortunately, the Republicans opened themselves up to this line of attack because their defense is so cowardly. Oh, it's unconstitutional because he's already left office. So let's just end it now. Why waste time on something? He's not in office anymore. Let's just move on and let's unify the country. Well, that's a very weak argument, and of course, the Democrats were going to come back and say, "Well, that means what? You have this, as you said, January exception. You can do what you like because there are no consequences for your actions." So, rather than address the obvious issue, which is that nothing that Trump said can count as incitement, that it's enshrined in the Constitution the right of assembly. There's a right to protest. There's free speech applies to everybody, including the president. And as we know from this Brandenburg versus Ohio case, the famous free speech case that the Supreme Court adjudicated in 1969, which is that you can say whatever you like unless there is an imminent threat of violence and that you intend that your words should lead to violence. So there are two ingredients. You should intend that the violence and that there is an imminent threat of violence. Now, none of those cases apply to Trump. So, and as for protesting what the senators and congressmen are doing, well, again, there's a right to protest. I mean, the whole idea that the public should just simply accept, oh, well, this is the legal constitutional process, and we must not in any way stand in the way of it, and we can't possibly go and protest what Congress is doing. It's absurd. And and the Democrats themselves don't adhere to that. I mean, we saw they were encouraging the protests against the Justice Kavanaugh. Well, he was justice now, but the nomination of Kavanaugh. They entered the building. I mean, and everyone and the Democrats were encouraging them to invade the building. And when that crowd invaded the building, they were accosting the various senators and so on. Whereas in this case, the rioters, I don't think any rioter actually even came close to any elected official. So, that's part of, the democratic process. There is a right to protest. There's no right to violence, but there is a right to protest. So for the Democrats to start suggesting that the Trump was doing something illegitimate because he was encouraging protest, well, no. I mean, there is a right to protest. And if the measure is going to be, well, because there's a slight danger of violence, whenever there's a protest, then essentially the First Amendment means nothing whatsoever. So that should have been the Republicans' argument. Instead, they adopted the cowardly argument, which is, well, he's not in office anymore, so let's not waste our time on this. Let's really get on with a really important business of the nation, and don't make life hard for us, and let's really unify. Well, of course, it's a losing argument because the Democrats have no interest in unifying. In fact, divisiveness is largely how they intend to hold on to power. So it clearly isn't interesting. And the divisiveness, it's quite a clever strategy. I mean, they want to divide the Republicans, and they're playing on the Republican divisions precisely because they don't want the united opposition. So they've been quite clever in splitting off the Republican establishment types from the Trumpians, so it's very much in their interest to maintain the divisiveness, and because it throws their opponents off balance, and it gets them fighting against one another. So Kevin McCarthy to make these pathetic pleas. Well, the time is now for unity. And didn't President Biden promise unity? I mean, McCarthy thinks this is a clever argument. He just says pathetic. I mean, and the Democrats will just go right at him, and deservedly. I mean, if you're making a cowardly argument, then people are going to come at you.
This is one of the Achilles heels, constant Achilles heels of conservatives and Republicans, and even some of the Republicans are starting to wake up to this. You're hearing Matt Gaetz, for instance, Congressman Matt Gaetz was saying the Democrats are playing hardball. We need to play hardball, otherwise they're going to steamroll us. And it seems it's quite an effective strategy by the Democrats, whether you agree with them or not. Right. They're basically flooding the field with hyperbolic statements, images, edited videos, crazy claims, pretending that they're all basically, on the front line of a war zone, or like Hillary Clinton, arriving in Sarajevo under sniper fire. Right. They're all putting their lives at risk by doing the business of the people, and that these savages desecrated the hallowed ground of our democracy, our beloved Congress, and so forth. And they're really laying it on thick. George, what I think is interesting is how the Democrats have suddenly discovered the Constitution, and they're really invoking constitutionality. And this president has basically the grounds for the impeachment. One of the grounds, there's about 10 of them that they've thrown out there. It's like an Italian chef, throw the pasta at the wall, and when it sticks, it's ready. But they're saying that he violated his oath of office. Everybody takes an oath of office in the U.S. government, and if you violate your oath of office, so apparently Trump, by inciting a mob, an insurrection, that he is violating his oath of office. But it's quite a shallow, thin argument when put to any scrutiny or interrogated, which the Trump's legal defense team did last night, not very effectively, not in the court of public opinion, but they did bring those issues up. But what's interesting is you could very easily say, and it seems to me like the First Amendment is also on trial here with this, and that's a very dangerous, which you've said a little bit earlier. That's a fundamental constitutional argument. So what's going on here, George? Because it seems like there's one constitution for the people, and there's another for the government. And how they're interpreting the U.S. Constitution through the lens of partisan power, for instance, using it to bludgeon the opposition with. But when it comes to constitutional issues, like Joe Biden has signed executive orders that many of them people might argue are unconstitutional. The federal government is forcing people to do things, mandating things that the federal government has no business mandating. Then there's the border question. There's the sanctuary cities question. There's a whole litany of these issues. And now we're back even to the First Amendment on this. So what do you think about the Democrats' rediscovery, this renaissance of constitutionality by the Democrats?
Right. No, I think that's a very good point. It is fascinating how they've suddenly discovered that this Constitution, which was all created by white men, slave owners, moreover, is now suddenly becomes this this hallowed document, and with that they worship. Well, of course, it's a complete fraud. And the First Amendment is something that the Democrats never paid very much attention to, because remember, during the Russiagate and during the first impeachment, they again denied the right of the president or anybody else, the basic First Amendment right to seek out information. So we can always say, "Oh, he was trying to get Ukraine to interfere in the U.S. election." But even if you accept the Democratic argument in the first impeachment at its face, which is he went to President Zelensky of Ukraine in order to dig up dirt on Joe Biden, you'd have to say, yeah, and he has every right to do so. And every American has every right to seek out information from any source at all. That's it. I mean, you don't have a right to slander someone. You don't have a right to smear and lie about them. I mean, then people have a right to seek legal remedies against lies. But when it comes to seeking out information, whether it's from Russia, Ukraine, or wherever, then everybody has a right to that. I mean, you can get on the phone to Putin and say, hey, can you tell me, anything you can, which is derogatory about, my political opponents? I mean, that's covered by the First Amendment. I mean, that was something that was written about by Justice Brennan, who said that the First Amendment entails the right to seek out information from any source, that the government cannot issue any prior restraint on the seeking out information. So, yeah, absolutely, the Democrats have very little time for that. And then, as you said about these executive orders, I mean, what is he saying? He's saying that the U.S. government will no longer enforce the laws. Well, he's supposed to be the chief executive. I mean, he's supposed to be the guy responsible for enforcing the laws. Well, how does he just get to decide that he's no longer going to enforce the laws? Because, I mean, you have legislatures, they have passed laws, and it's up to the executive to enforce the laws that the legislatures have passed. If you don't like those laws, then you should, enact new laws. But you can't just simply say, well, we're not going to enforce the laws anymore. We're not going to deport people. We're not going to stop people from coming into the country. Well, I mean, the legislatures have passed laws about that, but Biden is saying no, we're not going to bother enforcing laws. To somebody else might say, well, that sounds impeachable. I mean, if the person responsible for enforcing the laws is saying that he's not going to enforce the laws, then that's an impeachable offense. He's clearly violating his oath of office. But again, you're not going to get anything like that from the media. So, anytime the Democrats bring up this kind of constitutional argument, it is all a complete fraud. I mean, let's imagine it was the other way around. Let's imagine it was a Democrat and we had a Black Lives Matter riot, and how would the media respond? And let's say the Republicans decided to go ahead and impeach the Democratic president. The media was saying no. I mean, he's entitled. The president is entitled to address grievances. He's entitled to incite protests. He's entitled to all of those things. We know perfectly well that all of this, that that Trump is not entitled to incite protests. He's supposed to just accept everything. The Democrats would never believe that if it was the other way around. And we know, just in terms of Trump was protesting the 2020 election, we know that the Democrats protested the 1960 in 1969. They challenged the certification in 1969. They challenged it in 2001. They challenged it in 2005. Challenged it in 2017. They've always done it. Every election in which the Republicans have won, the Democrats have challenged it and have challenged the certification. So now suddenly, the media are sort of clutching their pearls. Oh my God, you're challenging this holy, sacred process of the American election system. How dare you? This is, men and women have shed blood for this glorious election. And we know this. I mean, we know that the Democrats would do exactly what Trump and the Republicans did if it goes the other way around. And we can be sure that if the 2024 election results in the Democrat defeat, the Republicans win, then we will have an immediate challenge to the legitimacy of the election. Putin, whoever, the Russians stole the election. And then after that, they're going to start challenging the certification by coming up with all sorts of bogus stories about Russians' nefarious activities in this state or that state. We know all this. And we know that when that happens, the media will again be banging the drum. Yes, my God, the Russians interfered in our election. We can't possibly allow this certification to go forward. Exactly what they did in 2017. So, we just know that this is such a cynical political exercise. It's kind of funny. We have to pretend to take it seriously, but essentially, Democrats are playing a very nasty, I think probably quite dangerous game. But unfortunately, too many Republicans are allowing themselves to be manipulated by the Democrats into going along with it.
And I might add, if the shoe is on the other foot, you can be absolutely certain that there'll be battalions of Antifa foot soldiers
exactly.
wearing
Black Lives
modified
Matter.
kitchenware on
Absolutely.
their
Exactly.
head
Yeah, that's
and
right.
firing whatever fireworks into the White House, like we
Absolutely.
saw in July of just this past year. The National Guard had to be actually called out because the White House perimeter was being sieged. They even burned a historic church, St. John's Church, I think. Of course, that was all glossed over by the media.
Right.
No problem there.
That's right.
I was
and
also,
remember, and that's right. And remember when they attacked Trump for essentially calling out the National Guard. That was my God, you're calling out the fascist jackboots. I think Nancy Pelosi used some sort of a phrase like that, the jackbooted thugs that he was calling out. Now he's attacking. Oh, why didn't Trump call out the National Guard earlier? So all of this is entirely cynical. But you can also, the Democrats will stick to their man. So should there be any impeachment move against a Democrat president, boom, every single Democrat will vote for that incumbent, just as every single Democrat voted for Bill Clinton and against impeachment in 1999.
Yeah. So let's just quickly look at the defense argument. What they're really, the case they're making here. First of all, there's the most obvious one is that the impeachment, according to the Federalist Papers, and that is again amazing how this is being reinterpreted depending on which side of the aisle you're on. But that the impeachment is really a last resort for, quote, removing a president from office. So of course, if the president is already out of office, then impeachment shouldn't apply. But not only that, the bar should be incredibly high for impeachment. Otherwise, it becomes a political tool. And the argument that the Trump's defense is making and that Republicans are making is that if you allow it to be a political tool this time, then you're really opening the door for this to be a tit for tat in perpetuity. And I think that's a pretty obvious argument. The bar has already been lowered for impeachment last year. So, I mean, this is even lower. He's not even in office. So that's one argument here. But getting to the actual substance of it, there is the letter of the law in terms of the U.S. Constitution and this process. There is the due process is a right of every American, including the president, of course, and the fact that he's a private citizen right now, and that if this was to go through the House in a proper way, witnesses would have been called before February, before Joe Biden assumed the presidency. So clearly that this was rushed through by the Democrats in order to get the ball rolling. They didn't have time to call witnesses and so forth. So there was no due process. He's being accused of a crime which isn't going to be adjudicated in any court of law. It's merely done in a political setting here. Not only that, the judge in a normal impeachment trial would be Chief Justice Roberts, the Supreme Court Chief Justice. In this case, it's Patrick Leahy, who is a rabid anti-Trumper and everything else. So a nemesis of the president is the judge. So, it's anything but a fair trial. So that's on the constitutional right side. And then you have the evidentiary point of whether this was incitement or not. To me, this is secondary. Due process would come first, I think, in terms of the hierarchy of rulings. I might be mistaken on that. So whether when you get to the actual accusations and charges, to me, that's secondary. Of course, the media is wanting to push that aside. They're making these process arguments and the president's guilty of X, Y, and Z. So again, it's being inverted depending on what side of the political paradigm you're on. And then there's the word insurrection. That's part of the incitement. Again, it's hyperbolic. That's down to interpretation. But then this is the interesting. There's no jurisdiction as well. Then this is an argument that Trump's defense team is making. Bruce Castor and David Schoen probably made a more stronger argument, more passionate argument than Bruce Castor made. Castor got castigated, no pun intended, apparently by Donald Trump, was furious, according to reports. I don't know how true that is, that the windows were being blown out at Mar-a-Lago from Donald Trump losing his temper as a result of the opening statements. But so what do you think about this, just quickly, this no jurisdiction issue and also the issue of due process? Because I think those, in my opinion, might be the strongest cases, or they should be anyway. But go ahead, George.
Well, that's a very good question. Now, if this were a proper trial, those issues would be front and center, because you go in any kind of a criminal trial, you make a constitutional argument. You say, hey, this case is based on an unconstitutional process. My client's Fifth Amendment rights were violated. You know, he hadn't been read the Miranda ruling. His Fourth Amendment rights were violated. You know, this was unreasonable search and seizure. So you'd ask for the judge to throw this out, and that, I think, you would do this. I mean, we've all seen those Dirty Harry movies where we're supposed to hate the liberal judge because the liberal judge says, well, Harry Callahan had no reasonable cause to look into the trunk of the car and then find the drugs, and so therefore the perp walks. While yes, that's all constitutional, we who watch these Dirty Harry movies, they say, yeah, but that's kind of unfair because this guy's a criminal, and now he's actually used all kinds of legalistic arguments to walk. So I think there is that danger, and I think that's why the Democrats are playing on this. Is like, okay, well, Trump is making this argument that this is unconstitutional, that his due process rights were violated, but they're legalistic. He's still basically guilty. He's just using kind of constitutional protections to get off. And that's why that guy, that Raskin, wrote to Trump. He said that, well, you better come and testify at this trial. And of course, Trump did what anybody would do in his circumstances. And no, I'm not going to do it. I mean, why should I help build your case for you? Because, of course, nobody can be compelled to give evidence against himself. I mean, that's obviously, it's in the Fifth Amendment. But it's true anywhere. I mean, the burden is always on the prosecution to make its case. But then when Trump defense obviously made that point, Raskin had the nerve to say, well, we will then draw a negative inference as to your refusal to testify. And that's what they're doing, is saying, okay, the more you raise these constitutional legal arguments, the more guilty you must be, because you're trying to hide behind the Constitution. And of course, it's an outrageous argument. It's a disgraceful argument. But it's one that may be quite effective to the public at large, which does not really understand these sorts of issues, and say, well, okay, well, if Trump is innocent, why can't he go and testify? I mean, people make this case all the time, not realizing that, hey, you cannot be compelled to give evidence against yourself, and you cannot allow them to manipulate your testimony in such a way that they can then bring perjury charges against you, which is the whole point. I mean, that's all they're really doing when they say come and testify, that they can build perjury cases against them. So that's it. So my feeling would be that he has a stronger case by raising the First Amendment issues. he can say what he likes, use his own words and say, at no point did I incite violence. On the contrary, I urged that they march peacefully to Capitol Hill. At the moment that I heard that the protests had somehow devolved into violence, I put out a tweet message saying everybody has to go home. There may also be a moment when he actually asked the National Guard to come in and to bring the violence to an end, or the protests or riots to an end. So that would be an argument of saying, that you just don't have any evidence that I incited anyone. I was, I wanted a peaceful protest. And then, what he could also do, I don't think he's going to do it, but I think that he could certainly do it, is say, look, I had a reasonable basis for thinking that the certification process was wrong. I a lot of evidence at my disposal saying that something very bad had happened during this election. And he can cite, the Time magazine article from last week. He can cite the reports, Peter Navarro's reports. Then he can also cite the lawsuit that was filed by Texas against the 4 states. I think it was Arizona, Georgia, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania and Michigan. I think it was 5 states. So he's got that. That was a big lawsuit that was joined by 18 other states. So he's got all the material that was in that lawsuit. He's also got the lawsuit that was filed in Georgia about all the shenanigans that went on in Georgia. So he says, look, I've got a ton of evidence here to show that there was some very, very nefarious activities that took place in this election. I had every reason to believe that the certification was wrong, and I had every reason to urge the senators and the congressmen to delay certifying the Electoral College. And the protests were the protests of people who were themselves outraged by an election that was not on the up and up. So I'd say that was also a good line of defense. Now, for lawyers probably want to just stick to the first part and say, hey, let's just challenge the constitutionality, and then let's just get this whole thing over and done with. And that, might be a good way of going about it. Boom, we can move on 4 or 5 days. We have a vote. He wins. Thank you. Goodbye. The problem with that is that there's a public perception. Public perception would be that, well, Trump has got something to hide. And I think that goes back to what I was saying about the Dirty Harry movies, is that, yeah, the perp walks, but we feel, hey, but he's kind of guilty. I mean, he did have the drugs in his car. So I think that's where the danger is if you take a sort of very lawyerly approach.
And Dave Schoen, I believe, came out, as did Bruce Castor. I mean, they kind of put the real argument out. The political argument is that you're invoking, talking to the Democrats, the prosecution, you're invoking the 14th Amendment, that this president is abrogating his oath of office, which would bar him from running for president or running for public office in the future. Okay, right. So that speaks to a political motivation, right? And
it's
that
kind of
explain, George, why they rushed the process in late January to really get this thing through. It really only speaks to possibly a political motivation there. Yep. But that's the real elephant in the room. And again, that circles back to the issue of, is impeachment to be used in this political manner? That's really lowering the bar of impeachment for future presidents. But go ahead.
Right. No, it's a case of the punishment in search of a crime. So they knew the punishment ahead of time. So it's like the Red Queen in Alice in Wonderland. Verdict before trial. So they knew the sentence before verdict, verdict before trial. So they knew ahead of time the goal that they wanted, which is Trump would be prevented from running for any public office again. And then they had to come up with the crime to justify that punishment. Well, of course, the crime is an absurdity, which is why the Democrats are using emotion as a substitute for legal argument. So you're going to just tear at the country. We talked about Raskin's family tragedies, and then you can whip up the horror of what happened on January the 6th, and everyone was supposed to be terrified for their lives, and so on. So that's what they're trying to do. They're basically trying to substitute for legal argument, substituting emotion for any legal argument. And, that is not an unsuccessful strategy, because they are basically, they've been given several hours on, television to tear into Trump. I mean, to smear Trump, for everything he has ever done. I mean, that film that they showed yesterday, I mean, it's all doctored. And it's a very slick production, but it was a doctored film in order to show Trump in the worst possible light. And people see this, and these things have an effect. And so even if Trump survives the impeachment vote, he has been smeared. I mean, his reputation has been damaged. And the people who voted for him, the people who supported him, his reputation being damaged. That's why if you're going to defend Trump, you really have to defend him. I mean, you really have to, attack this line of attack. You really have to, make a strong case on behalf of Trump, because what happened yesterday was very, very ineffectual compared to what the Democrats did. I mean, David Schoen, he made some good legal arguments, but there was never in any way as effective as what the Democrats did. And the other guy, Castor, he was a disaster. I mean, everybody agrees that, what the hell was he talking about? I mean, no one could even follow his argument. I mean, this is supposed to be a top lawyer, and he's just rambling and just free associational thinking. You have to think that basically Castor was working for the other side. I mean, he seemed to be just sabotaging Trump's defense. And it doesn't surprise me. I mean, there have been plenty of people who supposedly were hired by Trump, but who were really working against Trump. We think of Bill Barr or John Kelly or the McMaster and what was the name of the defense secretary? The one who
Mad Dog Mattis.
Yeah, Mad Dog Mattis, exactly. The one who resigned out of disgust that America was withdrawing from Syria, which wasn't. But so Trump has hired these people who were working deliberately against Trump's policies. So I wouldn't be at all surprised if this lawyer set out to sabotage Trump's case. I don't know, but as I was watching him, I thought, this guy's working for the other team. I mean, he's certainly not doing anything for his client.
No, that definitely. He was rambling on about. I got talking to a couple of people back home, right, and etc. Yeah. But I see a pattern, though, George. I'm going to step back now, and we're going to take the 35,000-foot airline view of the situation. If you look back to their first impeachment trial, look at the timing of where we were at there. That was in the run-up to the Democratic primaries. Joe Biden had not yet been anointed officially. They're still going through the motions of having primaries with 25 Democratic candidates. But yet the main thrust of the argument by Democrats at the time, Adam Schiff, etc., was that Donald Trump was trying to eliminate his competitor. That's when the bell went off in my head saying, Joe Biden is the anointed one. Yes. And that my original thesis that the Democrats would never allow free competition within their party, as was the case with Hillary Clinton, right. Then that kind of confirmed my thesis there. But then I thought to myself, this is interesting. So they clearly were not very confident about any Democrat being able to defeat Donald Trump. So they went through this impeachment to physically get rid of Donald Trump. So using political mechanisms to eliminate the competition, to eliminate the opposition via fiat, via all these various techniques, anything but an election. Or anything but due process. So, so again, and Joe Biden had a major scandal that needed to be buried in the Ukraine. This is beyond any doubt, and it's not just his son Hunter; it's Joe Biden himself. The things that he did as vice president, and not only that, the coup that was orchestrated by the Obama administration in Kiev, the putsch in February of 2014, I believe. That needed to be covered up because that was a dirty operation, and everything that came after that was incredibly, terrible in terms of what that administration did. What Joe Biden himself did in the Ukraine, running point on policy, which a lot of people didn't know that until after that he was basically in charge of that portfolio, and that would reflect badly on his aspirations to run in 2020. So it was a twofold strategy by the Democrats, George, which was to bury the Ukraine, accuse Trump of doing something that Joe Biden actually did and admitted he did on camera, and then eliminate the opposition, eliminate the surging populist maverick that was most certainly going to run very strong in 2020. And here we are again, George, another impeachment. And the clearly the motivation is political. It's to not to defend the hallowed grounds of the Capitol or anything like that. It's literally to eliminate Donald Trump from running for office in 2024. So we're seeing the bypassing of democracy, using PR, using demagoguery, eliminating the filibuster, adding DC and Puerto Rico as states, packing the court, opening the southern border to turn Texas blue, and on and on and on. Anything but straight up democracy. It's kind of to me, an overwhelming indictment of the mentality and the ruthlessness of this party and its operatives. And this is just, to me, another example of it here. It's using the levers, it's using the mechanisms, it's perverting the constitutional process, if you will, in order to game what is meant to be free and fair elections, the thing that they're accusing Trump of desecrating with challenging the November election still. But your thoughts on this overall kind of atmosphere?
I think you summarized it perfectly. I think that the impeachment actually changed the dynamics, whereby instead of the media or the public trying to find out what exactly was Biden doing in the Ukraine, why exactly was Biden seeking to oust a chief prosecutor in Ukraine, the chief prosecutor who was investigating Burisma, the company on which his son had a directorship. So rather, so here's Biden withholding public money, U.S. public money, in order to get somebody fired who was investigating his son. So that could be an important issue that would be looked at during an election. No, we didn't have that. Or indeed even going before that. Why exactly did his son get this extremely lucrative position in Ukraine when his dad was the Obama administration's point man on Ukraine? And again, and then again, the same thing happened with his son in China. So rather than have that, the impeachment turned it around and suggested that there was something nefarious about Trump trying to find out what it was that the Bidens were doing in Ukraine. And that's it. And then everybody started repeating, oh, this is terrible, this is terrible. He's trying to seek interference in the U.S. political system from another country. And then, well, he's the president of the United States. He should want to find out if any politicians at all were compromised and maybe involved in illegal activities in Ukraine. But the impeachment actually reversed it, and suddenly even suggesting that there was anything untoward about Biden's activities in Ukraine was totally reprehensible. How can anyone make any such argument? Of course, Biden was a fighter against corruption. I mean, that's his record. And again, that became the mantra.
Really, this is breaking new ground. Historically, impeachments are normally happening during the tenure of the target of the impeachment, the President of the United States. And in this case, for the first time ever, it's happening after the fact for a U.S. president. And so there's a lot of political motivations at play. And we've been discussing some of the various arguments, both on the prosecution side, the Democrat side, but also on the defense side, on the Republican side, with our guest, George Szamuely. And the hypocrisy, of course, is pretty obvious when you sort of look at this in any kind of objective fashion. But no one can claim objectivity in this hyper partisan environment, George. And this is one of the other problems that we're running into right now, is that if anybody does make an objective argument, they're being accused of being a partisan themselves. It's almost like there's no common ground. And if you think about the Constitution or the rule of law or the Federalist Papers as a ballast with which to keep the keel and to keep the ship steady for the Republic of the United States, that it's almost like it's really being ground down right now. And this has really been happening over the last 4 years. It's really exposed some of the worst partisan characteristics of the political system. Certainly, I had not seen that in my lifetime. I'm sure my parents have seen quite a bit of it through the 60s and early 70s. But from your experience, George, has anything come close to it, what we're seeing right now?
No, I don't think so. I mean, if you think back to Watergate, I mean, there's a sort of Nixon, of course, is a very demonized figure now, and everyone just only speaks negatively about him. But at the same time, I mean, you'd have to say that there were an awful lot of things that happened in the Watergate, and the sort of the onslaught against Nixon that was encouraged within the government and by the media supporters, that has a certain resemblance to what had happened today. I mean, without getting into the sort of the minutiae of Watergate, I mean, there was one thing when those Watergate burglars that were caught, they went to trial, and then you had this Judge John Sirica, who said, "Well, I don't believe their stories, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit them with a huge sentence because I need to find out what happened." And so these burglars were hit with sentences of 25 to 30 years in prison. Now, just in order to get them to talk about, what they were doing, who was behind them or whatever. Well, 25 to 30 years for the offense of breaking and entering is cruel and unusual punishment. But again, no one really cared very much about that because, hey, you're on the right side, you're against Nixon, and so on. So there's a kind of thing that when there is this mad rush, a kind of a hysterical mob that wants to destroy someone, then all sorts of constitutional and legal niceties are ignored. And there is an analogy between Nixon and Trump. Whatever the differences between their individual personalities, both of them were populists. Nixon had a real knack of speaking above the heads of the Washington elite, the media, the Congress, and so on. I mean, he managed to address. I mean, the public. I mean, his famous "the silent majority." That's what it was about. He said, "This is I have an understanding with the public. I'm with the regular guys against the Washington elites." And Nixon did generate enormous amount of hatred because he was a populist. Again, he didn't have Trump's flamboyance, but he was a populist, and his populism was successful in a way that was more so than Trump. I mean, he won the biggest landslide in U.S. history. I mean, remember, this was a person who was regarded, conventional wisdom had it that he was charisma challenged. He wasn't the most appealing and warm, charming person. Yet he won a 49-state landslide, and that was because he had a certain knack of appealing to the public and appealing to the kind of the blue collar support that the Democrats had just taken for granted as belonging to them. But he actually managed to address it, and I think that there was a conspiracy to bring Nixon down. It originated within the FBI and the CIA. Remember who was Deep Throat? Deep Throat was Mark Felt. Who was really the guy in charge of the worst era of in FBI history under J. Edgar Hoover. This guy was no angel, but he hated Nixon because Nixon didn't like Hoover. He was also passed over for promotion to get Hoover's job. So these were the people who were trying to bring down Nixon, and so there's some of that what was happening in the case of Trump. Trump made a lot of people nervous. However ineffectual his attack was, because I think Trump was swept up by a movement that he probably didn't fully understand himself, but he was swept up by it, and people, for some reason, saw Trump as speaking to them, as being their representative, as their voice against the powers that be. And, the Washington elites didn't like that, and they're the ones with the power. And they said that they have more power than the president of the United States. And it took some doing for Silicon Valley just to say, well, we're going to deplatform. He's the president. We're going to deplatform him. That's it. And there's nothing that the president can do about it. We're with the ones who have the power. And so, we suddenly realize with Trump is, well, who really does have power in America? And it was not unlike what happened to Nixon. He just a 49-state landslide, but he didn't really have power. It was the permanent Washington that had the real power.
But at least they didn't impeach Nixon after the fact.
No, that's very interesting. Exactly, it brought it to an end. His resignation brought the impeachment process to an end. Exactly.
Yeah. So I mean, you actually touched on what I think is the fundamental point here of all this, George. On the defense side here, or Trump's side, they're making logical arguments. They're talking about fact. They're invoking the rule of law in constitutional law, the Federalist Papers, etc. And then on the other side, you have an emotional demagoguery laced argument, very emotive. That's just the accumulation of animus for Trump over the last 5 years coming out. So there's kind of, to me, what you said about Nixon and what we're seeing here. It's the swamp versus populism. It's the permanent state versus populism. Donald Trump could, if he wanted to be Huey Kingfish Long for the nation,
right.
He could be. He could go a lot further, I think, than he does. But it's even as restrained as Trump is, a lot of the time, it's too far. It's too far for the establishment here. So is it maybe the thing that this is an autoimmune reaction by the establishment against populism? And this isn't anything new, George. This has happened before. Right. But your thoughts?
Exactly. That's exactly right. Populism is the absolutely the place where you don't go in America, because you go there, you're liable to end up either with a bullet or thrown out of office. Remember, I mean, George Wallace was a populist. I mean, if you leave aside the issues of race, he was an economic populist, much as Huey Long was. He ends up shot. Bobby Kennedy was a populist, like in '68 again. So it's a dangerous path to go down. I mean, when you start challenging very powerful interests. And I think what we clearly realized, and I think that Time magazine article illustrated, is that there were very, very powerful interests that were determined to stop Trump. I mean, we're talking about a Chamber of Commerce, we're talking about Wall Street, we're talking about the leaders of organized labor, rather than just simply ordinary workers, but the leaders of the AFL-CIO. You have the powerful lawyers, who worked in the white shoe law firms. They were all determined to stop Trump. And Trump, again, maybe in an effectual way, did challenge. He did challenge certainly the military-industrial complex. He did challenge Wall Street, and when that happens, he did provoke an attack. And he also challenged the kind of identity politics that had that had been dominant in the United States for the last few decades. He also attacked the judicial system. I mean, no one really before Trump had brought all these judges into question the way he did. I mean, people say, "Oh well, the U.S. judicial system, it's all fair." Yeah, they might go wrong here and there. This person, this minority, get a rough deal or whatever. But Trump just made a full-blown attack against the judicial system. I mean, he just calls judges clowns. They're political hacks, which of course they are. But no president had ever done this. You're supposed to show respect for these sorts of people. He didn't do it. I mean, the things he said about the FBI and the CIA. Again, he's calling the most fundamental institutions of the United States into question. So when you do that, you're walking a dangerous path. And I think that there was a conspiracy to get Trump out. Now, if he's going to come back, he's going to have to figure out how he's going to do it, how he's going to challenge the powerful interests. I mean, he'd have to build a movement. He'd have to build a movement of people who think like him. He didn't really do that. He decided, well, now I've won the election, so I'm going to hire all these Washington insiders who will, come around to my way of thinking. Well, that didn't happen. He did hire Washington insiders, and they pursued their own agenda. And when the time came, they were all ready to put the boot in. Every single one, every single person who worked for Trump left, and then immediately came out with books and interviews telling what an awful person Trump was, and how he's the worst thing that has ever happened to America. So yes, that's what happens. I mean, if you're an outsider, and then you decide to staff your administration with insiders, well, you end up you end up where Trump is.
I think only Ben Carson is probably one of the only loyal to the end. Everybody else was.
Yeah, I think that's right. I'm thinking Ben Carson. Is there anybody else?
It's difficult to say. Mark Meadows.
Mark Meadows
was very loyal. In fact, Mark Meadows made an interesting statement in the media in the last 24 hours, saying that Donald Trump had asked for 10,000 National Guard.
Right. Yeah, I saw that too. Yeah.
If that's documentable,
that's exactly right.
That would be a smoking gun that would put the whole thing to an end. The obvious thing here, George, with what happened on January 6th, is that the DC police, for all intents and purposes, stood down. I've been to the Capitol before when there's a concert or an event on the front lawn, and they have double barriers put into place. You could never get that close to the Capitol steps,
Right.
even in normal times. But for some reason, 50,000 people were allowed to butt up against that building
Right.
while they were actually doing the certification of the
Right.
electoral votes. It's not as if people couldn't see it coming. Clearly, the president, Donald Trump at the time, did see that it was coming. And of course, they knew that there was going to be a crowd. He was going to be involved in the sort of demonstrations, as it were, giving his speech earlier. But there's no such thing as a smoking gun with this media, unless it's the gun that they want to see smoking.
Right.
But besides the arguments that the Capitol is no longer a safe space, that's a turning a DC into a college campus, effectively turning the country into a college campus, with Facebook community standards rules now. There's another last argument, and we will kind of leave it here. We've gone way over time, but I really appreciate it, George,
Sure.
because everything that
It was
you've
fun. Yeah,
had to
really
say is
interesting.
absolutely crucial on this issue. The last argument is made by Technofog on Twitter. Is somebody I follow. He's actually a lawyer, fantastic forensic document analyst, and he published this. The title of his recent article here on Substack is on being judged by the guilty. And he said, besides the jurisdictional argument against impeachment, besides the evidentiary argument against impeachment, there's a moral argument. And that how could you be judged by an organization, a group that itself is proven to be guilty and corrupt? And Exhibit A on this, George, and we're going to circle back to this issue because I think it's actually fundamental. Russiagate, 2016 to 2021, it's actually still going. And if you think of, we very easily that people forget the media, the Democratic Party's own role. This is even before the first impeachment trial. I mean, this thing it crosses every possible line that you can possibly cross. The weaponization of the FBI. I mean, we're not even going deep into the Obama's politicization of the DOJ and the IRS and everything else, but that is a kind of a moral argument that's not being touched. It's not being spoken of. You talk about QAnon. I mean, we can go expand on QAnon, George. How long Russiabait's been going? I mean, people are calling it Blueanon because this is the Democrats' version of QAnon is really Russiagate, but the implications of Blueanon are actually quite serious. They're dictating U.S. policy at home and abroad. But on this moral question, George, I know you can't make this argument in the Senate trial, and the Republicans won't make it either because many of them are on board with Russiagate as well. But this really speaks to, I think, the deep corruption, the deep crisis that we're at politically right now. But go ahead.
No, that's exactly right. And it's something I've thought about as well, that everything about Russiagate and the outrageous activities that were indulged in by the Obama administration, spying on the opposition presidential campaign, attempting to entrap members of the opposition campaign, coming up with these bogus, fraudulent, lying charges like the Logan Act, trying to use the Logan Act against an incoming national security advisor. All of this sort of if you remember, just in the case of Michael Flynn, they essentially continually rewriting the 302s, the records of the interviews with Michael Flynn, to make it seem that he was lying. The fact that Michael Flynn was prosecuted for supposedly lying to the FBI when he hadn't lied to the FBI. It was clear he hadn't lied to the FBI because they were talking about sanctions. He was talking about the expulsion of the diplomats. Two quite different things, because Obama imposed two different forms of punishment on the Russians. And what Flynn was talking about with the Russian ambassador, Sergei Kislyak, was the expulsion of the diplomats. So when he was asked, did you discuss sanctions? He said, no, I didn't discuss sanctions. We were talking about the expulsion of the diplomats. But essentially, he was tricked into pleading guilty. I mean, he was tricked, first of all, into having an interview with the FBI, which he thought was just simply a kind of a friendly background chat. He didn't think that essentially they were trying to entrap him, and we know that the only purpose of that interview was to entrap Michael Flynn so that they can then prosecute him. So we know this. We know this was all instigated at the highest level of the Obama administration. We know about that guy Kleinsmith. I mean, what did this Kevin Kleinsmith? What did he do? He worked at the Department of Justice. He deliberately forged an official document. He knew this was a lie. It was an official document, but he forged it in order to for it to say something the opposite of what the CIA had actually said. The CIA had said that Carter Page had worked for us. So he forged it to say Carter Page didn't work for us. Now, it's hard to think of anything a more serious crime than that. You're forging official documents. The guy walks with a $200 fine. So we see the ghastliness of this justice system. Everything, and this was all instigated by the Obama people, many of whom were now, happily ensconced with cushy jobs in the Biden administration. And yet all that has just been forgotten. And even the very fundamental charge that they had made, that Trump colluded with Russia to steal the 2016 election, that's still regarded by much of the media as being true. That's still, they still hold to that is true. So amidst all the talk about how dare you question the integrity of a U.S. election, well, you've been doing it for 4 years. When it came to the 2016 election, you challenged that. And even today, I saw an article on Politico written by Natasha Bertrand, who has been one of the ardent Russiagaters. The thrust of the article was that, well, now Biden has access to the transcripts of the telephone calls between Trump and Putin, and maybe he's going to release them. And now we're going to find out about what nefarious deals were struck between Trump and Putin. And then you think, well, Trump didn't do anything at all to help Russia. We know that one of the first acts of the Biden administration was to sign a 5-year extension of the New START agreement, in which the American side had abandoned every single one of Trump's demands. You remember, Trump had said 1-year extension, freeze on Russia's nuclear hardware, and China must be involved in any future negotiations. Every single one of these demands the Biden administration has abandoned. And yet still the media report, nefarious secret deals between Trump and Putin, when, the most obvious evidence goes against it. But that's it. So that's still the official. They will go on repeating that there was some secret negotiations going on between Trump and Putin. You never tell us what it is they agreed on, what was the outcome of any of this. That doesn't matter. You just create the suspicion, and then you just keep repeating it that there was some suspicious friendship between the two of them. Facts don't really matter at all. I mean, it's just you just keep repeating the lie over and over again, and then people say, okay, well, maybe there was something going on between Trump and Putin.
Yeah, and I have a Russian bot right here, George. This is controlling this whole broadcast right now. This was issued by the Kremlin itself, just to let you know.
Well, that's right, because you had a call earlier from Vladimir Putin himself, who's just told you, keep up the good work, Patrick. Keep undermining the U.S. system. That's what we want you to do.
Yeah, so I mean, that's the biggest conspiracy theory, officially sanctioned, made it into U.S. policy. They're sanctioning people left, right, and center based on the conspiracy theory, if you will, that the Russians installed Donald Trump into the White House effectively in 2016. That's never been walked back.
No.
There's been
No.
books written about it, endless books. In fact, in my mind, that's one of the political motivations that's keeping Julian Assange in the position that he's in right now in Belmarsh prison. Is because of that. It's because of the pervasiveness of that idea that dominates U.S. foreign policy. It informs NATO policy as well. I mean, we can joke about it on one hand, but on the other hand, it is quite serious. And I think personally, it's a bigger threat to U.S. national security, to our political system, than anything. And it's even worse if it's being used to empower agencies like the NSA, like the CIA, to bypass the Constitution and to infringe on people's civil liberties and rights. I mean, if you compare that to QAnon, which is really an internet fringe subculture, the sort of thing that was birthed out of 4chan and Reddit. And, it doesn't have any official status, despite what people say, whatever her name is from Florida, some freshman congressman that she sided with QAnon theories or whatever. That's not formulating U.S. policy, and it's not framing the domestic trajectory of U.S. politics. But RussiaGate is. It still is after 4 years. But I'll give you the floor for your final thoughts on this, and what do you think is going to happen as well, George, in the next couple of days with the impeachment? What direction do you think this is going to go?
Right. Now, just a coda to what you said is that to judge who has real power anywhere is whom can you attack and whom can't you attack. The fact that you can attack Trump with impunity, you can deplatform him, you can say what you like about him, the worst possible things, and there are no repercussions, means he doesn't really have very much power. The fact that you can't really attack Obama, the Obama administration, Biden, if you start bringing up Hunter Biden, you get deplatformed. Remember, that was a crucial piece of intervention by the big tech in the election when they prevented the dissemination of news about Hunter Biden's laptop. Why did they do that? Well, they did it because that's where the power lay. They knew that the power lay with the Democrats, with Biden, and so therefore we don't publish anything negative about that. So that gives you an idea. So when you said about QAnon, who cares about QAnon? You can say what you like about QAnon. No one even knows what it is, to be honest. So you can just make up anything you like about it. And of course, to draw out the circle in full, there is no question that we will hear a lot more about the supposed links between Russia and the domestic terrorists, these right-wing American nationalists, these right-wing white supremacists. They're all in cahoots with Moscow. Of course, if you ever ask for what's the evidence that there's any link between them, you can forget that. Instead you'll get long articles in the New York Times with people talking on background, telling us, well, we've uncovered an awful lot of connections between the Kremlin and QAnon. We can't, of course, disclose what they are, but rest assured, we've definitely onto them. So yeah, that's it. So you managed in one fell swoop. You keep going after Russia, and you go after the so-called domestic terrorists in the United States. And as you say, that's a dangerous business. Russia is not in the mood anymore. I mean, the Russians have there's a change in tone, from the Russian leadership. They just don't want to hear any more of these accusations, and they're sick to death of being used as a kind of a whipping boy in American domestic policy. So, if you listen to the things that Lavrov says, you listen even to what Zakharova, the foreign ministry's spokeswoman, says, they are just not in the mood anymore. So any of this nonsense, with the Russians are involved with domestic terrorism, they're going to react very negatively, and I think that is we've already seen news reports that the Americans are expanding their presence in Syria. I think that's likely to lead to some kind of a confrontation with the Russians. Again, the Russians are just not in the mood to bend over and disappear. They think, hey, we achieved what we achieved in Syria. We're not going to allow the Americans essentially to take it away from us. So this, as you said, there was Russiagate. There's a real danger of leading to a more serious confrontation. As for the future of the impeachment, I mean, I tend to think that they're going to move and try to wrap it up as quickly as possible. As we were discussing earlier, it's not really to the Democrats' advantage to start bringing in witnesses, because then the Trump people are going to bring witnesses, and that could be very embarrassing for them. I mean, if they start citing all the various demagogic statements by Democrats, how they were encouraging violence. If they bring up the issue of, why was there no proper policing on January the 6th in anticipation of, large-scale demonstrations in Washington? Was there an order to stand down? Who issued that order? If you start bringing things like that in, it's going to be very embarrassing for the Democrats. So I think the Democrats will just, I think, who knows, something may have happened, but they will make their emotional pitch. They'll make their as much, they're trying to throw as much dirt as possible on Trump. The Trump people will make their legalistic constitutional argument. I don't think it will be anything like as effective as the Democrats' argument. And then there'll be a vote. And I would imagine, Trump will be acquitted again, probably something like 43, 44 Republicans will vote for Trump. And then that'll be the end of it. What happens then, of course, is interesting. Does Trump launch his own political movement? Will he step aside and decide that, well, maybe I'll just allow my son to take over as the sort of the heir apparent to Trumpism? I don't know, because he's kind of disappeared. So we don't know, because he's no longer on Twitter, we don't know, what he's really thinking. He doesn't seem that pugnacious. I mean, the fact that he tolerated such an ineffectual defense would suggest that he still seems a little shell-shocked about everything that happened subsequent to the election. From the way the way the courts ruled and so on, and then of course January the 6th. So he may not be in the mood to get back in the arena, so to speak, and seek the presidency again. But I don't know. We'll have an idea after he's acquitted what his real thinking is.
Yeah, it might even be a case, George, where his base, his supporters won't allow any other choice but that he runs.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point, because the base is sticking by him. I mean, it's kind of surprising, despite all the attacks. Every single Republican who has gone against Trump in the impeachment has been subjected to censure, threats of primary, and attacks from their core constituencies. So basically, there's been no attacks on Trump at all. His supporters have stuck by him, and so I think that's quite an interesting development. I mean, I think that his base do feel that he has been wrongfully treated, that what has happened to him is an injustice. And I think that's, in particular, this trial will obviously continue. There will, without question, be a lot of sympathy for him. I mean, there is going to be the sense that this is manifestly unfair, what is being done to him. But again, it's hard to know exactly what he is thinking. I mean, Trump's personality is one that he kind of bounces back. I mean, he's had many setbacks in his life when he seemed like everything was over for him. He managed to bounce back. I remember he was facing bankruptcy in 1991. It looked like his whole business was over. I mean, his control of his business was taken away from him, but he managed to bounce back from that. So he may still do so. Of course, he's 74 now. It gets harder to bounce back at 74 than at 44. But so certainly, he's not someone you can ever discount, basically.
Yeah, no, without a doubt. So it'll be interesting. We'll see what the result is. As you say, George, it's probably going to be an acquittal if you're just going straight by the numbers. But then again, nothing can be for sure in this crazy political environment. So I wouldn't put all my money down anyway.
No, absolutely not. I mean, those who say, oh, it's all in the bag, it's all a waste of time because the Republicans will stick by him. Nah, Trump never had too many friends in the Senate, to be honest. Those people who are now in that 44 column, has Mitch McConnell, Lindsey Graham, Richard Burr. So these are not friends. I mean, these aren't loyal allies that he can count on. So he doesn't have. I mean, in the House, I think he has a much stronger Trumpian constituency. I mean, I guess because they're closer to the people because they have to run for election every 2 years. Senators, it's only every 6 years. But he definitely has never had allies. I mean, like John Thune. You could name all of these. Marco Rubio. None of these people are exactly Trumpian allies. I mean, they if they thought it was to their advantage to abandon Trump and to vote to convict, they would do so. So they're all making little calculations now as to what's to their advantage.
Do you think it's possible that the last thing that just came in my head based on what you just said, George, do you think it's possible that the Republicans would throw Trump under the bus in order to allow this precedent of the politicization of impeachment to go forward and then use that after they take the House in 2022, that the GOP House would then use this to impeach Biden or Harris or whoever is president then? Do you think that's a remote possibility, that they will take on the politicization, the weaponization of impeachment?
Well, it's an interesting question. There may be some Republicans who think along those terms, but I don't think Republicans would do that. I mean, when they did it under Gingrich in the 90s toward Bill Clinton, remember, then they had a special counsel who kind of, he basically had made it very difficult for them to do anything else. I remember Kenneth Starr had been appointed by Congress, so he wasn't working for the Justice Department in the way that special counsel these days are. So he had been appointed by Congress, and he had submitted his report, and I can't remember, was it 9 felonies or 11 felonies that he charged Bill Clinton with? So the Gingrich Republicans really had very little room to maneuver. You kind of wonder whether they would really have gone ahead with the impeachment of Clinton if they didn't have Kenneth Starr's report, and the pressure that came from that. What I'm just saying is that the Republicans don't fight with anything like the ruthlessness with which the Democrats do. I mean, the Democrats absolutely don't hesitate. They do it. I mean, they come along with impeachment. Their vote is solid, and they intend to win. Too many Republicans, they want to be in the good graces of the right people. They want to have good write-ups in the New York Times. They want to have CNN to say nice things about them. They want to be invited onto CNN. They want the good and the great and the respectable people who have nice parties to think well of them. The Democrats already have them, so they don't have to worry about that. So I think that's why you can always, chop off at any time there's any kind of political crisis, you can always take about 20% of the Republicans and get them to vote flip on the side of the Democrats. So, will the Republicans then think, okay, now we're going to impeach Biden or Harris? Some of them might. But they're not going to get a majority in the House. I dare say, some of the Republican firebrand, like I think you mentioned Matt Gaetz, Jim Jordan, Devin Nunes. They'd be all for it. Can they get 218 votes to impeach? I have my doubts.
No, and then it would be just a case of them becoming the thing that they are decrying right now. So that would be unfortunate if that ever did happen. But I'm not again counting anything out, George. But,
no, it's possible that there are Republicans who are thinking in those terms, but it's a very foolish thing, because all that'll happen is that Republicans will have lost. It's a big thing for their man, the Republican standard bearer, the one who led the Republicans to victory, getting impeached and convicted and prevented from running again. It's a big humiliation for them. They're all, essentially they're all convicted for having followed him. So if they're making a calculation that, oh, well, yeah, but now down the road we can do this, well, forget that, because you basically took a very bad beating now, and no one's going to believe you that after this beating you're going to bounce back and be ready to throw punches in 2 years' time. It's just it's not the way the world works.
Well, there's a lot to certainly going to be a lot to unpack after next Monday, George.
Right.
So we'll be keeping an eye on it, as I know you will as well. Before we go, George, just give a shout out about your relatively new talk show, the Gaggle with Peter Lavelle.
Yeah, the Gaggle. Yeah, that's right. It's the Gaggle with Peter Lavelle. So you can find it on YouTube. I think just put in the Gaggle and you'll find it on YouTube. It's also on Rumble. So you can look for the Gaggle on Rumble. And we usually post something every day. So we have a discussion, about whatever topic is on the agenda. And I think it's quite entertaining. I'm sure you'll find it entertaining. And so, absolutely, look for us there. We've already got about 260 videos up there, so you can enjoy, a lot of discussion about all the things that have happened, over the past year.
They're very good. You discuss, especially on these type of topics,
right, exactly.
With U.S. politics. You got great guests on as well. I particularly like when your discussions with Robert Barnes are.
Robert Barnes, he's great. And I don't know whether you've had him on your show, but he's always great.
Yeah, incredibly informative, and it will definitely be a place to go for if you want to get good insights on what's going on right now with the impeachment. In the next week or so, tune into George's and his colleagues, the Gaggle. We'll try to leave a link to that as well on our show page for this program for 21 Wire Live. But thank you again, George.
Well, thank you, Patrick. It was a lot of fun. Very, very interesting discussion.
Thank you. Well, there he goes, ladies and gentlemen. That's George Szamuely. He's a senior fellow at the Global Policy Institute. We'll put a link to George's chat show, the Gaggle, as well under our show notes on YouTube, but also up on 21stCenturyWire.com. And keep an eye on us this weekend. We have another edition of the Sunday Wire radio show. It's going to be going live on ACR, the Alternate Current Radio Network, this Sunday. So you can catch us there. And also Friday at the UK Column News. And that's a live program for those of you who don't watch it, but that's UK time, 1 p.m., Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I appear with Mike Robinson co-hosting the Friday news program at the UK Column News. That's incredibly informative and great analysis on that program. Those of you who watch it know all about it, I'm sure. And if you don't watch it, we hope that you'll tune in for those two programs. And we'll have another very special edition of 21 Wire Live coming up maybe on the weekend. We've got a new topic that we're going to unveil, which we're going to be doing a lot more work on in the coming months and in the coming year. as well, and that's the issue of space and what's going on in the lower Earth orbit and above in terms of the militarization of it, and of course how this is going to affect us and affect geopolitics on the ground now. And that's something that we've been able to do because of your support. Now, we're all running a winter fundraising drive right now. So there's links to that as well in the description box and at the bottom of our show page here at 21stcenturywire.com. We'll hope that you support our work for this program, the Sunday Wire, also our written work, our reporting at 21stcenturywire.com. All of that is really people powered. And so we really rely on your support. If you want to donate or subscribe and become a member at 21wire.tv, we hope that you will. And we're working hard behind the scenes to improve all of these programs and launch some new ones as well going forward. So there's other things that we've got in the pipeline. But thank you again for tuning in to this very special impeachment edition of 21 Wire Live. We really appreciate you being with us, and we will see you very soon, hopefully. So everybody out there, take care, all the best, and check us out on Friday and Sunday. Again, all the best.